Let's look now at the national picture. Chris Philp is the Conservative MP for Croydon South, but first, Andy Slaughter is Labour's shadow housing minister. His Hammersmith constituency is adjacent to Grenfell Tower. Andy Slaughter, first of all, a lot of high-rises were built under various governments' watches. How many, decades old, do not have sprinkler systems?
Many of the older blocks will not have sprinkler systems, and the recommendation on retrofitting, which you've heard of from 2013, has not been implemented. In fact, it was specifically rejected by a previous housing minister.
The Lacamal disaster was on Labour's watch, and Labour did not push through for what was required and suggested by the coroner, which was retrofitting of sprinkler systems. So, in a sense, Jeremy Corbyn's making this a political issue. It is a political issue now.
Well, it is a political issue, but let's be clear what needs to be done now. And just to correct you on that point, the coroner's letters, which came out in 2013, they're the ones which haven't been implemented. Now, I think that the issue here is that this is on a completely different scale from any previous fire. So we have a situation where you've got in the space of 15 minutes, I was talking to eyewitnesses there at the scene today, we've had the fire spreading from one corner of the block to the entire block.
But in lots of Labour councils throughout the land, there are buildings which have been reclad. There are also buildings that don't have sprinkler systems that are older. What is being done right now? Is there an assessment going to be made around these councils to see what problems there may well be? We don't want to scare people, but the truth of the matter is, if buildings are reclad in materials similar to this, there could be problems.
That is the absolute priority question. I'm sure many councils, like my own, are doing that assessment now, and I'm expecting a report from them tomorrow. But this has to be a job for central government. We cannot wait for the public inquiry to make these analyses of whether there are other tower blocks at risk in the country. That has to be our #1 priority. Even if there aren't any, people will be worried that there are.
Thank you very much. Turning to you, Chris Philp, John O'Neill from the Fire Protection Association has told us the Department of Local Government Communities resisted reviewing building regulations because no one was dying in these buildings. Did Grenfell have to happen before you act on the warnings?
Well, I think successive housing ministers have been discussing updating the fire regulations for some time. And in fact, a meeting was scheduled to occur when the election got called just a few weeks ago. On the point about the fire in 2000...
4 years, 2013, 2017. The truth of the matter is, if something similar had been found in, for example, an aircraft, because of false cladding that was not suitable, or the fact that sprinklers weren't fitted, it'd be shut down, just the same as an aircraft fleet shut down. But the problem is the people who don't have any power live in these high-rise buildings and nobody listens to them.
Well, going back to the coroner's report in 2013, one of the key recommendations was that the Secretary of State write to social housing providers asking them to consider fitting sprinkler systems. And the Secretary of State, Eric Pickles, at the time, did that straight away, and some councils responded immediately.
But some councils wanted more relief for the central government to allow them to carry more debt in order to refurbish these buildings.
Well, as we just heard, I mean, the building we're looking at here actually had a £10 million refurbishment very recently. As I've seen the figures that you quoted, it would have only cost £200,000 to put sprinklers. So it wasn't really a question of money, it was a question of priorities and what the regulation says. Now, something clearly extraordinary happened in that building 48 hours ago. And we do need to find out, as a matter of urgency, exactly what it was. Was it the cladding? Was it a lack of sprinklers? Was it something else? And whatever it was that happened in that building, we need to make sure never, ever happens again.
But as well as that, presumably, somebody actually, unusually, will have to carry the can.
Well, I think if that public inquiry, led by a judge appointed by the Lord Chief Justice, so completely independent, they can call any witness they choose, if they find an individual or a corporate body failed in their duty, then clearly prosecutions should follow. But that is something the public inquiry will have to look at and report on.
What do you think the government should do in the interim, straight away before the public inquiry?
I think in the interim, it has to do two things. It has to give reassurance to the hundreds of thousands of people who live in tower blocks that they are safe, but it also has to give assurance to the people who live around Grenfell Tower who are justifiably very angry that their concerns have not been listened to. And in setting up that inquiry, it has to be open and transparent, and people have to be persuaded, as they're not at the moment, that it is going to read the truth. And if it does read the truth, and people are responsible, then they must be punished for it.
I think there should perhaps also be a sort of an early interim report after a matter of a few weeks or maybe a couple of months. If there is any critical failing, for example, like the cladding is highly flammable, which some people are suggesting, we need to know about that in a matter of weeks.
And move people out the buildings.
And if there are other buildings which have that dangerous cladding, then immediate action needs to be taken in a matter of weeks or months, not in a couple of years.
Well, presumably you're suggesting then if there's similar cladding in other buildings, then people should be moved out immediately, not in a couple of months.
If it's flammable, yes.
Let me just talk to you about Theresa May, because we understand, perfectly understandably, that she did not want to interrupt the work of the voluntary services or indeed the emergency services, but she chose not to meet residents, and it was cited as being for security concerns. To me, that seems quite extraordinary, because people could have met her in private. It could have been perfectly safe to meet people. Do you think that that really showed somebody that was showing her compassionate side?
Well, I'm not sure it was just security concerns. I think she was keen not to intrude and cause disruption at a time of intense anxiety and grief. I mean, the people concerned were still searching for loved ones.
Isn't it important to have your Prime Minister show that she cares?
Well, she does care, because she's launched a public inquiry, and what she's trying to do is be practical. Talk to the emergency services, find out what needs to be done, rather than grandstanding in front of the TV cameras. Now, I'm sure she will meet the families, but the day after they've lost their loved ones, I'm not sure the last thing you need is the Prime Minister of the country sort of elbowing their way in, to be honest.
Can I say, I've spent a lot of the last 2 days down there. I was there with Jeremy Corbyn, who went this morning. People didn't think he was intruding. They thought he was showing simple human sympathy and kindness.
Thank you both very much indeed.